is yours. Looking forward to you talking about all things interviews. Whenever you're ready, you can take it away. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen.
Thank you, Bobby. So interview, I think we spend a lot of time, well, candidates spend a lot of time getting their applications together, working hard on their resumes, their job applications, getting, that foot in the door, as it were. Once it actually comes time to interview, I think people can quite often feel a little bit bewildered. They've sort of gotten this far and are maybe not quite prepared for the next step. So I thought I would run through some of the top tips that I've got as a recruiter doing what feels like a million interviews, and feel like I've learned a thing or two that I can pass on and hopefully be helpful. And especially in the current recruitment climate, which obviously is different post-COVID to what it was pre-COVID in quite a few ways. And I'll sort of run through those a little bit as well. So really, the topic for today is you've got the interview, now what? So from my perspective, and this would be a top tip to take note of, from my perspective, the interview begins as soon as you get the invitation. So as soon as you have received an invitation as a candidate, you are in an interview process. And that means that everything that you do or don't do from that moment is forming an impression and is forming part of your interview. And what I mean by that is things like, if you are sent an invitation, respond promptly and professionally, and using the sort of right level of language. So yeah, that makes it much easier for us to push you through the process, and it puts a gold star next to your name. And I guess what an interview process does is as well as highlighting all your skills and experience that match the role and team fit and all of those kinds of things, it also is painting a picture of you as an overall person. And that helps me to maybe see the types of issues that a client or a hiring manager may experience in the future, i.e. not super communicative. Could be a bit of a red flag for some roles. So that would be my first tip, is that the interview starts as soon as you're invited. So following on from that, how is the interview going to look? So 2 years ago, 3 years ago, well, that was a really simple question to answer, because it would look like being sent a time and turning up for an in-person interview. And that is quite often not the case. It is quite rare that we will do a first round interview in person. That does happen, and it's appropriate in lots of situations. But quite often now, your first round interview, or if you are successful to obtain a first round interview, may be online. And in saying that, one of the, I guess, top tips to take note of is that if you are invited to an online interview, it is still an interview. Meaning that all of the things that you would expect for an in-person interview are still in play. And that means things like being on time. It's maybe not as crucial to be sort of 10 minutes early the way that you might be for and should be for an in-person interview. But certainly, 2 or 3 minutes, if I'm logging on to Zoom and I see a candidate is there before me, that's another big tick for me. Other things as well in terms of online interview and really remembering that it is still a first interview, things like your background. Now, my laptop's a little bit dodgy, so I can't have a fancy background on mine, but you'll notice behind me is nothing. And that means there's nothing messy, there's nothing. And that is fine with me. I have seen some things that you would put here on your chest, the things that I've seen, and in the background of people's Zoom interviews. So, probably you want to maybe think about less intimate spaces. So maybe not your bedroom, unless it is sort of a wall. It's probably not going to be appropriate to be sitting in the car park of Coles having a first round interview. However, that has happened. And obviously, as well as Zoom, as well as sort of your background, also dress in a way that you would expect to dress and present yourself for a first round interview. I've had candidates who haven't brushed their hair, have clearly just sort of rolled out of bed. I know that from here down is pajama bottoms. I just know it. So those kinds of things all make an impression. It's not, I would say, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Tyler and Bobby, but I do think that online interviews do have an inherent informality, and I think that's fine. So I don't necessarily expect people to be buttoned right up, but neat and tidy and well presented is always going to make a great impression. And obviously the inverse of that is also true. The other thing would be clear, if it's online, clear connection to the internet, and make sure that's been tested ahead of time, because I want to learn as much as I can about you, and I can't do that if I can't see or hear you. So that's really important. So testing that tech equipment and being comfortable with the platform that you've been asked to interview on. And if you're not comfortable, you've never used Zoom before, you'll hear me say this a lot today, Google is your friend, but also it's absolutely fine from my perspective to reach out and ask. And I think that most recruiters would feel the same, and most hiring managers would feel the same and would appreciate the proactivity. So moving on to in-person interviews. So it may be that your first interview is in person, and certainly I would expect a second interview, which is in our process and quite often the final interview. That will very likely be in person. So things that are going to help with nerves, as well as, make sure that you're prepared. Scope out the parking ahead of time, scope out the traffic conditions ahead of time. Understand the best way to get yourself to that interview on time. I think 10 minutes is really respectful. Any more than that, and I'm talking about being early, of course, never ever late, just forget it. But being early, I think 10 minutes is a great time frame. Much earlier than that isn't necessary, and potentially, the interviewer may not be prepared for you at that time. You are most likely going to be asked to come in. If everything is as it should be, you'll be asked if you want a drink of water. Say yes if you are offered that, and that's not just because of any social awkwardness. What a glass of water is really good for, and this is really useful if you're ever interviewing anybody, is it gives candidates something to do while they're thinking of an answer. They can have a drink, and it can be a lifeline for you if you do need time to run through something. Obviously, all those old favorites like shaking hands if you're offered. Obviously, with sort of post-COVID, I don't always see that anymore. And so I would just, obviously, whatever you're comfortable with, but I would just take the lead of the interviewer rather than offering your hand first. And then really, once you're in person, if it's one person, you just want to wait for them to speak. They'll introduce the interview and get started from there. That neat and tidy presentation that's appropriate for the role is really important. It would be quite odd maybe if you were going for a role as a lifeguard to turn up in a full three-piece suit or a full face of makeup with false eyelashes. But if you're going for a role as a makeup artist on a makeup counter, that would be very appropriate. So you just really want to make sure that however you're presenting yourself makes sense for the role. Also, if it is a first round interview in person, it may be a panel interview. A really good tip for that one is don't let that, obviously it can be more intimidating, but remember to just address the person who's addressed you. So answer the question to whoever has asked it, and that can make it feel a little bit less like you're addressing a room, and can sort of help combat some of those nerves. Speaking of nerves, another top tip from my perspective would be, again, Google is your friend. So research is one of the best tools and the most underutilized resources that I see as a recruiter. There is nearly nothing that Google cannot answer for you. You can be prepared in looking at the company's LinkedIn page. You'll be able to find out who the main players are in that company. You might be able to see articles on projects that they're working on and the stages that those articles are at, those projects are at. You may be able to find links to media about that company that might be relevant, or industry trends that are affecting that company at the moment. You might be able to connect with people who have done the role before you. There are many ways that you can put your best foot forward in terms of research. The other things that you can look at are Glassdoor, on their socials pages, and also making sure that you've reviewed the PD and the job ad, because you'll find that a lot of what you're going to be asked is directly related to the PD and the job ad, and it puts a lot of power in your court, and it comes across great if people, you know, are answering questions that are relevant to those things. So in terms of what people are looking for at interview, I think it's really important to remember, again, this will help with nerves, is an interview is looking for a win-win outcome. Absolutely everybody in the room wants you to be the person for that role. And what that means is, from my perspective, I'm not interviewing somebody on their interview skills. So if somebody is stumbling a little bit or feeling a little bit nervous or needing a moment and saying so, it's absolutely fine to say, I just want to think about that for a second and I might come back to it. That's great. That shows me self-awareness, a level of confidence. It shows me that you can read a situation. It's much better to do that than to sort of waffle aimlessly. Everyone is in your corner and wants you to be successful. So I think that that should give you a lot of confidence. And that's always been true. It is especially true now in this market. Once you're at interview stage, we all want you to be the one. So that should give you a lot of confidence. In terms of confidence, when you're answering interview questions, again, it's the sort of research and being prepared. You might want to research an interview technique, an answer technique. And there's lots of them around. Some common ones that you hear is the STAR technique, which is the situation, task, action, and result, meaning that if you're asked a question, you can point to a specific relevant example, rather than things like, well, I would do, it's I have done. And so an example of that would be, I had a candidate I was recruiting for a general manager for a local sports club. A question was asked of the candidate of, around their achievements. It's very simple. The situation was they needed to increase revenue. The candidate did some research and realised that when customers order through a QR code, they spend 30% higher on average per order than if they go up to the bar. So then he implemented that system. It has measurable results, and there you go. And he spoke about some figures as well. So those quantifiables are really great too. The other thing in terms of being prepared and being prepared for interview questions is I'm a generalized recruiter. I'm not somebody who recruits for tech specifically. We recruit across a wide range of companies. And so one of the first things I'm going to do when I'm creating an interview guide is Google the role and interview questions. And you can do that too. So you are more than welcome to hop on Google and just put in whatever role you're looking for and Google some common interview questions that you might be asked, because chances are you are going to be asked one or two of them, and having an answer prepared is really useful. And again, sticking to that sort of STAR technique will be really helpful for you. Some of the questions that you might specifically expect in almost every interview would be things like strengths and weaknesses. Make sure they're relevant for the role. It's absolutely fine to be honest. It again shows self-awareness and an understanding. Tell me about yourself. That's going to be coming up in absolutely every interview, and you can be prepared for that. Keep it relevant for the position, friendly and open, but you don't need to tell your life story or anything that's personal. That's absolutely fine. It's okay to think about questions. It's okay to come back to questions if you need to, and it's absolutely okay. And I would encourage you to have notes ready. You're never going to have points taken off for having bits of paper. No one's going to fault you for being organised. I guess the other thing that I would say is it's very likely that in most interviews you will be asked whether or not you have questions. And the answer to that is yes. Yes, I do. You can really ask whatever you like. A really good sort of one that you can have in your back pocket is you can ask somebody who works there, how long have you been here and what do you like about it? It'll give them a chance to open up to you, creates a bit of rapport. It's a great question. Also, at the end of an interview, as things draw to a close, just make sure that you do use that basic etiquette, and that's online or in person. Thank the people who are there for their time. Thank them for being open with you, and just let them know that you're looking forward to hearing from them. And the other thing that I would say that I don't see very often, but I'm always impressed by, is 24 hours later, you are going to put yourself in good stead if you follow up with the person who interviewed you with an email, thanking them. It was great to meet you. Is there anything else you need from me? They might go, yes, actually, your references. So it just, again, keeps those lines of communication open, shows what kind of operator you are. You're onto it, you understand processes, you don't wait around for things to happen. You're a proactive, engaged person to have in their workplace. And so I think that's probably quite enough to keep your head spinning for a little bit. But I think that Bobby's going to have my contact details. Any questions, you can feel free to ask, and you're more than welcome to fire them through to me directly.
Thank you so much, Gemma. Some great gems in there. I was writing some notes down to ask you a couple of things, but then you covered them all beautifully. One thing that I would love to say, though, if you are going to an interview and you might be with the business owner or it's a smaller company, when you do research and you talk about that research, say that you found a post that was in the media or whatever, we love it. We love hearing about that. Like, we work hard in these businesses. And so for you to turn around and go, hey, I saw that you did this, this is great, it's going to make me feel so great about you. So that's another tip. And also remember, it's an interview, it works both ways. It's not just our mindset sometimes has been brainwashed to think that we have to, it's all one way. It's two ways. You have every right to ask as many questions as you want, and ask for examples, even ask, say, how does that work? What does that look like? Because you're going to make a commitment to that company, and if it's not right, then you're going to waste everyone's time. So make sure you ask those questions. But Gemma, you're a superstar. I'm just going to share my screen again and give you a screen to, you can zap that there. That will give you an email address to email Gemma with. And if you've got any questions or you want to reach out to learn more about the Proven Group, or you can also reach out to myself.